My name is Harold. I turned 100 this past spring, and I still sleep in my own bed. That's the part people focus on. They say it like it's some kind of victory, like I beat something, like I outran an ending that was waiting for me. I didn't beat anything. I just refused a few things early enough that I never had to refuse them later. I've never lived in a nursing home, not because I'm stronger than other men, not because I was luckier, because of what I chose not to do when I was still able to choose. At 100, you don't think in decades anymore. You think in mornings. I wake up slowly. My knees argue with me before I even sit up. My hands are stiff. My balance isn't what it used to be. But the walls are mine. The silence is mine. That matters more than people understand. When I was in my 60s, I watched friends begin to give things away. First their responsibilities, then their routines, then their decisions. They called it simplifying. Sometimes it was, but sometimes it was surrender disguised as comfort. The first thing I refused to do was hand over decisions before I had to. It sounds simple, but it isn't. You start small. You let someone else handle your paperwork, then your finances, then your appointments, then your schedule. You tell yourself it's easier. Easy becomes permanent if you're not careful. I kept my affairs in order, not obsessively, just clearly. I paid attention to where my money went. I understood my own medications. I asked questions at appointments instead of nodding. I refused to become passive in my own life. Doctors don't mean harm, neither do children. But people are quick to take control when you seem uncertain. So I worked hard not to seem uncertain, even when I was. The second thing I refused to do was build a life that required constant maintenance. I never bought the biggest house I could afford. I bought the one I could clean. I never filled it with more than I could manage alone. When my wife was alive, we kept things simple. After she passed, I kept them simpler. I watched neighbors age inside homes they could no longer carry, staircases they avoided, rooms they stopped entering. Pride kept them there too long. Then crisis forced a decision for them. I refused to let crisis decide for me. In my 70s, I moved into a smaller place, not because I needed to, but because I saw what was coming. People thought I was giving up something. I was protecting something. Independence doesn't survive excess. The third thing I refused to do was stop moving, not exercising, moving, walking to the mailbox, sweeping my own floor, carrying groceries one bag at a time instead of asking for help immediately. Small efforts repeated daily are quieter than gym memberships and grand resolutions. But they add up. I watch men my age sit more each year. Recliners became permanent. Television filled the hours. Muscles don't disappear overnight. They leave gradually when you stop asking them to stay. I wasn't athletic, never was, but I stayed in motion. Even now, I make my bed slowly. It takes longer than it should. I rest halfway through, but I finish it. Finishing small things keeps something alive inside you. I refuse to treat age like a permission slip to surrender effort. That doesn't mean I ignored pain. I respected it. I adjusted, but I didn't collapse into it. The fourth thing I refused to do was isolate myself. This one surprised me. It's easy to become invisible when you're old. People stop expecting you to show up, so you stop. I didn't attend every gathering. I didn't force myself into noisy rooms. but I kept a few steady connections. A weekly coffee, a standing phone call, conversation with the same cashier at the market. Familiarity matters. Loneliness weakens more than the body. It weakens your will to continue. I refuse to let my world shrink to four walls. Even now at 100, I step outside daily. Not far, just enough to feel the air change. The fifth thing I refused to do was pretend I was younger than I am. Denial is expensive. I saw men fall because they wouldn't use a cane, refuse help because they didn't want to appear frail, hide symptoms because they didn't want to admit decline. I used the cane when I needed it. I installed railings before I fell. I told the truth about what I couldn't do anymore. Acceptance preserves independence better than pride. At 100, I know my body is temporary. It always was. But I never handed over more than necessary before necessary arrived. That's the difference. People think avoiding a nursing home is about strength. It's about foresight. It's about refusing convenience that quietly replaces capability. It's about adjusting early instead of collapsing late. I don't judge those who made different choices. Every life has its own path. But when I look back, I see clearly that independence is not built in old age. It's built in middle age. In the habits you repeat, in the decisions you don't postpone, in the pride you let go of before it cost you. I'm 100 years old. I don't know how many more mornings I have in this bed. But this bed is mine because I refused a few small surrenders decades ago. There's more to it than that. There always is. When you live to be 100, people assume you must have followed some secret formula, a diet, a supplement, a rigid routine. They lean in as if I'm about to hand them something they can write down. What I actually did was less impressive. I refused to give up responsibility for my own emotional weight. That one matters more than the rest. I watched men my age grow smaller, not because their bodies failed, but because the resentment hardened. They replayed old arguments, old disappointments, old betrayals. They carried those like trophies. Bitterness ages you faster than time ever could. I refused to rehearse my grievances, not because I was noble, because I could see what it was doing to them. Their conversations became narrow, their faces tightened, their world shrank to a list of wrongs. When you shrink emotionally, you shrink physically soon after. I let things go, sometime before I fully understood them. Not every hurt needs to be solved. Some just need to be set down. I also refuse to let my children parent me before it was necessary. That one took care. When you get older, your children become nervous. They watch you differently. They want to fix, arrange, manage. It comes from love. But if you surrender too quickly, you teach them that you're finished. I let them help where it made sense, but I kept deciding. If I wanted to rearrange my kitchen at 85, I did it. If I wanted to drive until 92, I drove, carefully, honestly, and then I stopped when I knew it was time. I didn't wait for someone to take the keys. You have to be the first one to admit when something is over. That's dignity. Another thing I refused to do was speak about myself as if I were already gone. I noticed this in others. They'd say things like, "At my age, what does it matter?" Or, "I'm just waiting." Waiting for what? Life doesn't become less real because you're closer to the end. I refuse to live in a waiting room. I planted small things even at 90. Not trees I wouldn't see grow tall, just herbs, tomatoes, something to tend. Tending keeps you in motion emotionally. I refuse to stop being curious. Not about technology. I never cared much for that. Curious about people. The young man who fixes my sink. The woman who delivers my mail. I ask them about their lives. When you stop being curious, you quietly announce that your chapter is closed. Mine isn't closed until it's closed. I also refuse to compare my aging to anyone else's. Comparison is poison at any age. It's fatal when you're old. One friend ran marathons at 80. Another needed full-time care at 75. Neither of them were failures. Your body writes its own story. I listen to mine instead of envying someone else's. And I refuse to let fear make my decisions. Fear is loud in old age. Fear of falling, fear of forgetting, fear of being a burden. Those fears are real. But if you organize your life around fear, you'll surrender long before you must. I adjusted for risk. I didn't bow to it. There's a difference. People think independence is about strength. It's not. It's about staying involved in your own life, even when it's slower, even when it's smaller. I make my own breakfast. It's simple. I wash my own cup. I sit in my chair by the window every afternoon and read the paper, even if it takes me twice as long. These things aren't heroic. They are anchors. Every task you give away voluntarily is one less thread tying you to your own competence. Give away too many and you float. I refuse to float. That doesn't mean I never needed help. There were hospital stays, surgeries, weeks when I couldn't manage alone. I accepted help then, but I treated help as temporary assistance, not a permanent identity. That mindset changes everything. If you see yourself as dependent, you begin acting dependent. If you see yourself as capable within limits, you find ways to remain so. I refuse to let limits define the whole picture. At 100, my world is smaller. I don't travel, I don't drive, I don't climb ladders or carry heavy boxes. But within the circle I still occupy, I am fully present. That's the part people miss. Independence is not about doing everything. It's about fully inhabiting what you can still do and refusing to abandon it before you must. I also refuse to let shame guide my aging. Shame about needing hearing aids, about using a cane, about forgetting a word. Shame pushes people into hiding. Hiding accelerates decline. I speak up when I can't hear. I laugh when I forget something simple. Embarrassment is a luxury I don't waste energy on. I don't know how much longer I'll be here. I don't pretend I'll live to 105. But I know this. The reason I never needed a nursing home wasn't luck alone. It was 1,000 small refusals. Refusing early surrender, refusing unnecessary pride, refusing bitterness, refusing to hand over my identity before it was truly time. Independence isn't won in your 90s. It's protected in your 50s, strengthened in your 60s, adjusted in your 70s. By the time you're old, you're living on the habits you built decades earlier. I'm 100 years old. I don't move fast. I don't see perfectly. I don't sleep through the night. But I wake up in my own home, and that didn't happen by accident. It happened because I refused, quietly, repeatedly, to give up more than I had to. That's all there is to it. Nothing heroic. Just a long line of small decisions that kept me here. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.